Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're learning Masechtas Nazir daf Mem Aleph. We are going to begin on Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, about 5 lines from the top. Rabbi Lezer, my taima. So this goes back to what we saw in yesterday's daf, that when it comes to the Nazir, as well as someone who is a Mitzayra or a Levi, they have a mitzvah of having their hair cut. And the question is, when they do the shaving, is it necessary to be with a razor or with other things? So we end up saying that it's necessary with a razor. And even though by mitzvah it doesn't actually say the word tar, but we nonetheless derive that it must be with a razor. According to the Rabbanan, it's because there's a prohibition of shaving one's beard, and it's only a hashchasa. It's only something which is a giluach, a shaving, which is destruction, which is a razor. And therefore, that which is not allowed, so then when it comes to a mitzvah, it is allowed. Now, according to Rabbi Lezer, who says that instead, a person could be chayiv, even when it comes to the removal of the hair of the beard, even with other items other than a razor, so then he has a different issue. Then how does he know by the mitzvah? So we end up saying that the reality is it does say zakana. It says that they're supposed to remove the hair from the beard. And if it's true that it would be okay to use anything else other than just a razor, so then the problem is that if in fact the isser is only shaving with a razor, your beard, so then according to Reish Lakish, he says that when you have a situation where there's an aseh and a los aseh, where you could figure out some way to be able to not violate the isser, so it's better to do it that way. And therefore, Zikano teaches us that because if in fact it was true that there was another way of doing it, then we would not be able to use a razor. So the very fact that it says Zikano, that comes to tell you that in fact you must use a razor. So that's what it's coming to tell you. Because if it was optional to use other things, then you would not be allowed to use a razor at all. So it comes as a reboy to tell you that in fact you are allowed to use a razor. That's the whole point. By a mitzvah. That's how we know. Again, when it comes to a Nazir and when it comes to a Levi, it already says in the pasuk. The whole question is by a mitzvah. Fine. So Rabbi Lezer, my time. What is the reason of Rabbi Lezer? And I put this in parentheses for some reason, but the Mefarsh says, "Koimer hoyel ulamukmis l'haitan l'hadetani l'el de mitzvah yel of Medina Rabbi Lezer de betar in b'minei achvina lo my taima in Medina." So the question is, what is his reasoning? So he says, Yolav Meroishai. He learns it out from a different part of the pasuk when it says the word Meroisha, the Sanya. Rosho, and the entire pasuk the pasuk says, V'haya b'yom hashvi, on the 7th day, Yigalach es kol sa'aro, we cut all their hair. That's Rosho, Vesikano. So again, it says Rosho, and it says Zikano. Because the question is, if it says that your Yigalach is kol sa'aro, they're supposed to cut off all the hair, so then why does it need to mention anything about the Rosho or Zikano? Obviously, it's a davar pashut, because that's part of es kol sa'aro. So why does it need to then mention more in the pasuk? So that's why it's seemingly extra. So Desanya. Rosho, the pasuk says Rosho Matal Meloimer. Why does it need to tell us that? Well, again, it's obvious that you have to cut that off. So Lefisha Nemer Gabi Nazir Tar Yavarel Rosho, because when it comes to someone who is a Nazir, it says that a razor, while he's a Nazir, is not allowed to cut his hair, and he can't have a razor pass by his hair. Yachol Af Nazir Mitzarakain. You would think the same din would apply if, let's say, he was a Nazir and he was also a Mitzayra. Talmud Loimer Rosho. So the pasuk Rosho comes to tell you that you could use a razor during that situation if he was a Nazir Mitzayra. Says the Mefarsh, Yachim Rosho dechsev l'gabi Mitzayra. It says V'gilach es kol sa'aro. ves rosho. So rosho my Talmud Omer, v'luksiv sa'aro, v'rosho b'chlal sa'aro, right? So as we said, it's already inclusive. So what's it coming to tell us? Let's continue the Mefarish. Gabi Nazir tarli yavro rosho. Since when it comes to a Nazir, it says he's not allowed to cut his hair with a razor. So al rosho. So Talmud Omer gilach es rosho batar kamosh yamarti l'chol gabi Nazir. So he said it's the same din. Rabbi Leser Savar la kirab Yonasan. The Yarmul El we said previously the gabi Nazir. When it comes to a Nazir lo machayiv el batar. The isser of cutting his hair is only if you use a razor. Not when it comes to anything else. It wouldn't be chayiv. So achinami hai diasiri gabi Nazir. Also over here, when it says that it's usher by a Nazir, mishtri gabi mitzayra. Well, matter by a mitzayra. Umaydol machayiv li gabi Nazir. And when he's not going to be chayiv by a Nazir, kigoin milkat verhitni lo shari b'mitzayra. That will also not be allowed by a mitzayra. Okay, so that is the drasha that we learn out from the word rosho. So mamai, Gemara, dilmo oilam afilu likto b'milkat verhitni mitzakavid. Maybe when we're dealing with a mitzayra, maybe even if all you're doing is removing it with other forms other than a razor, like pincer and remover, that you're still doing a mitzvah. So v'chitei matar lamli. So if that's true, that you could use other things other than a razor, so why when it says it by Nazir, why does it say the word tar? Well, remember to tell you that feel batar. Maybe it means that he could even use a razor. That it doesn't mean that it's dafka these other things, but the chiddush is that we even allow you to use a razor in which normally you're not allowed to use. Saltach and you think Nazir ki avid batar mechayiv. When it comes to a Nazir, if he would use a razor, he's going to be chayiv for cutting his hair. So gabi mitzari nami l'chayiv. So also when it comes to a mitzayra, it would be the same din. Kamash mulan delo. So maybe that's what's come to tell us. So Gemara says no. As we said before, you can't possibly say that he's doing a mitzvah also not just using a razor, but removal of any other way, because minulok kasav tar, the fact doesn't say tar, kureish lakish. Again, so the point is that you need to use a razor, because as we said before, according to the sheet of Reish Lakish, the issue is that what happens is that since you have an isser normally of cutting your beard with a razor, so okay, we have a mitzvah of doing the tegalachas, the cutting, but again, if you have the ability to do it in any other way, so then you should do so. And therefore, it wouldn't even allow you to use a razor. You should use these other things. And the fact is, it must be that you're not allowed to use those other things, because if you were allowed to, then that's what you would have to use. That's what Reish Lakish explains. As we said before, if you have the ability, then you should do both. So, which would mean don't use a razor. But the very fact is, it must be then that you're not allowed to use these other items. And therefore, that's the point, that even when it comes to the situation of a Matzayra, the din is that we require him to use the razor. So on this, the Gemara asks, Rabbanan Hai Roshomai Darshibe. According to the sheet of the Rabbanan, what did they do with this seemingly extra word? What is this? What do they use for this drasha? So midboilahu lamidchilav dahakafa. It comes to tell you again that even though there's a general isser of hakafa, there's an isser of shaving your head completely, right? Nonetheless, Rosho tells you that you are allowed to do that in this circumstance because it's a mitzvah to do this. However, in a normal circumstance, you're not allowed to. But over here, we allow it. Desanya. Lo sakifu pas roishchem. It says that a person is not allowed to cut the corners of their hair, which includes the payas. Yochalaf mitzarakain. You would think also a mitzar is not allowed to do this either. So Talmud Lama Rosho. That's the whole point. According to Rabbanan, Rosh is telling you that even though normally mitzar is, even though someone is not normally allowed to cut off his payas, however, when it comes to a mitzara, he's allowed to. If you look at the very last Mefarish l'hachi kasar rachmana rosho v'ashmi'inan defilu hakafas kol rosh shema hakafa. That even if you hold a kafas kol rosh, that cutting off and shaving all of your hair, that's considered to be a violation of hakafa, not just when you just cut off the payas, but if you shave completely bald. So, and that's a machlokus whether or not we say that. But even if you hold a kafas kol rosh as shema hakafa, which means you're actually doing a violation by cutting off all of your hair, nonetheless you're allowed to, because that is the din of a mitzvah, that you're supposed to do so. So the Gemara asks, okay, so we have the pasuk which says Rosho, we have the pasuk Sekano. So Lamla Michtav Rosho. The question is, why does it need to mention Rosho? Tepik Le Meziknoi. Why don't we just learn that same drasha from cutting off the beard? And normally you're not allowed to cut the beard. However, for a mitzvah, we say based on Zekanoi that you're allowed to. The Sanya Zekano Matam Fishenemer Ufasikanoi that normally you're not allowed to cut off the beard. Yochlap and Basar can't tell me Zekanoi. So again, if the whole point of Rosho is coming to tell you that you're allowed to shave off all your hair, and that's not an issue by a Mitzayra, but that's something which we already derive by the beard. That just like you're not allowed to cut off the pants, you're also not allowed to cut off the beard. So you could just learn one from the other, that even though there's an Isser, when it comes to a Mitzayra, you're allowed to do that. So why? Because that's the din of Mitzayra. He has to not just cut his hair, but also his beard. So the question is, why does he need both? If it only mentioned this chiddush, that you're allowed by a mitzvah to cut off the beard, you would think maybe only the beard. You would think that cutting off kol harosh, shaving off all of your hair, that's not considered to be hakafa. That's not considered to be like you actually violated anything. Rosho, because so Rosho is telling you that there's a chiddush that's telling you that the din is that hakafa's kol rosh is normally shma hakafa, and therefore normally it's a violation of cutting off your hair, all your hair, and therefore you need the pasuk of Rosho to tell you that even though that's true, normally you're over an Isser, but Rosho is the chiddush that you're allowed to do it by Mitzayra. But if it does, you don't need that pasuk. If in fact there would be no Isser to begin with, if you held a kafas kol rosh is lo shema hakafa, and therefore the fact that it mentions Rosho tells you that in fact normally hakafas kol rosh is hakafa. That's the whole point of why it needs to be mentioned. That even though normally it's not allowed, but by a mitzvah it is allowed, even though you're shaving off all of your hair. As we continue to Mem Alpha Mid Beis. Because of Roshavoi Kasav Zakanai, so only mention Rosho. So the chiddush is that even though a kafas kol rosh is shma hakafa, so therefore maybe then itself should tell you that even though it's absolutely an isser, and you're allowed to shave your hair when it comes to a mitzayra, so certainly by a beard you can cut off the beard as well. So why does it need to mention the beard? The lokas of zakano habamina mishum mashma tarti. The asiyase, v'dachi, and salosase. You can say it's mashma two things. One is that an asay can come, namely shaving off the hair, and it's daicha the losase of cutting the payas. Umashma, it's mashma da kavas kol rosh hakafa. It's telling you this great chiddush. So maybe that's the whole purpose that's coming to tell you those two things. Or be a kati b'tarminol, but we wouldn't necessarily know that you'd have to use a razor by a mitzvah. As I said, by a mitzvah, it doesn't mention it specifically that there's a requirement to use. It doesn't say in the pasuk atar. It's only through these drashas. Therefore, Zekano comes to teach us that chiddush. In other words, if it only mentioned Rosho, you would maybe only think it's coming to teach us these other important chidushim, namely that an aseh is daichalos aseh. That's one point. And in addition to aseh daichalos aseh, it also is coming to tell you this notion that hakafas kol rosh is shma hakafa, and therefore you need Zekano to tell you no. Also, in addition to that, it's talking about specifically with a razor, and therefore, because of that, that's what's coming to add. Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's look at question 11. Question 11. So, amai itzrach rabbanon riboy. Why does the rabbanon require gam uroisho gam zekano l'manu dedachi asay de mitzayra l'lav da hakafa? Why do we need both psukim to tell, or both words, if you will, to tell us the same thing, that a Mitzar is allowed to cut off his hair on his head as well as on the beard. So why can't you derive one from the other? So we just said before that if it only mentions zikano, you would think that hakafas kol rosh lav shema hakafa. That if one shaves all of his head, there's really no isser, and therefore there's no reason to mention. The fact that we mention the pasuk shows that otherwise it would be usher, and the chiddush is that we allow it because of roshel bolvad having made it in mitzvah sabatar. You wouldn't know necessarily that there's a mitzvah to use a razor, a requirement to use a razor. Shekain iser hakafas harosh b'kein tar nami asura. So therefore, that's why it mentions zikanoi, to tell you that the din is that you're also going to be chayiv. You're also that's how it's supposed to be used. Okay. Question 12. Iser hashchasa payas zakin. The iser of destroying the corners of the beard. The imhu dafka batar. Is it something which is only with a razor? So this is what we also saw. It's a machlokas tanoim. According to the Rabbanan, it's dafka batar. It's only with a razor. According to Belezer, afil b'shar mashchisin. According to Rabbi Lezer, we saw that even other forms of destruction, other ways of destroying it, as we said at the beginning, that he says that you're going to be chayiv in other ways as well. So therefore, again, that was the problem. How do we know that by Matzara he must use a razor? So he says because of the word rosha. That was the point over there. So it's actually a machlokas whether or not there's an isser of hashchasas pas zaken if it's dafka by a razor. So that is actually a machlokas, again, a machlokas tanoim among the Rabbanan, who says dafka with a razor, and Rabbi Lezer says afil shar mashchisin, other things as well. Okay, let's just see a couple more lines. Very short Amud over here, and he says as follows. So actually, we learned out one of the chidushim over here is that asay v'dachilos asay. The asay of Matzara cutting his hair is daicha the los asay of not cutting off your payas or the beard. Okay, so on the Gemara says, how does he know this? Because if we're using Rosho to teach us asay asay v'dachias los asay, but Rabbi Lezer didn't use that. Rabbi Lezer said that he needed Rosho to tell us the requirement that even though normally you're going to be chayiv by the removal of anything, right? I feel likdul and mikla and rehitni. Nonetheless, he comes to tell you that you could use a razor, right? Gami nazir ki yavid batar mechayiv gami mitzar namil chakamashim lo. So he said it has to be because based on Reish Lakish that when it comes to mitzar you have to use a razor. So the question is, since he learned that drasha from there, so what does he do? How does he know asay asay b'doich chasos asay? He doesn't learn it out from the case of mitzayra. So what does he say? So Gemara derives it based on this famous piece. Yolav megedilim. He learns it out from gedilim. Desani lo silva shatnes. We know that there is a prohibition. Actually, let's look at them first before we go further. We know that the Rabbanan we just established, he learns out this notion of Mitzara, they can cut off his hair and from Zikano, the Hashchas Zakin Asale Ase, the Vegilach es Kosaro, V'dachis Lulav the Hashchas Zakin, or Belezer Minole. So how does he know this? So he learns out Ase Daichas Asase from Gedilim. So what is it? The sign shatnes. A person is not allowed to have in his garments a mixture of wool and linen, as we can see Mem Beis Alf. Hagedilim tasalach mehem, says the Mefarish. The ka dachi lav dolosilba shatnes. That gedilim tasalach, which has to do with the mitzvah of tzitzis. So a person is allowed to wear them even though there is this forbidden mixture. So the asay of tzitzis is doicha the lois asay, or of talos is doicha the lois asay of shatnez. Fine. So let's look at, we're going to actually stop there at these two dots, but let's look at question 13. Elu shnei mekoidos muskarim besugyan. These are the two places that asay is doicha los asay. So, according to the Rabbanan, Roishay dechsib b'matzayra. Kamashmon dedachi aseh digiluach lois aseh hakafas haroish. Hakafas kol rosh shema hakafa. It's a los aseh of cutting off all your hair, but it's an aseh for the Mitzvah to cut his hair. So the aseh of the Mitzvah pushes off the los aseh. Or from lusil bashatnes of some gedim tassel kamash when the aseh tzitzes the dochi lav the shatnes. That there's a mitzvah of tzitzes, so therefore you can wear tzitzes even if it's not made out of, even if it's not, even if it's made of wool and linen. Okay, question TA12. Mehechen Yolef Rebbe Lezer di Guluach Mitzar Batar. How does he know that there is a requirement that when it comes to the Mitzayra, that he has to use a razor? So the answer is, he learns it out from a Roishay. The Koya Nazir Mitzayra is talking about a Nazir who's a Mitzayra. Vol Yolef Mizdikano, the Svirle the Hashchas Zakin B'chol Hamashchisen. You can't learn from Zakanoi because he holds the prohibition of Hashchas Zakin is anything, not only a razor, but any form of destruction. Rabbanan L'matzi Yolef Mikra de Rebbe Lezer, Rabbanan L'svirle Rebbe Lezer, de Iser Nazir B'chol Hamavirin. So again, this is TA 16 that Rabbi Lezer learns out. Let's put this over here on Amud Aleph. That Rabbi Lezer holds, he learns it out from Roishai. Again, based on this idea of a Nazir Mitzayra, the din is that he's allowed to, he's required to use a razor. Okay. Kain Shahiyat Tami Mace. Okay, we didn't do that. TB 16, maybe I did already. Mahu Shir Hagilach Lakai, so we did that. Question TB 17. Maha Makar Rubu Kakulai Min Hatayra. So this is something in which we will see next time. Adkan.